All right, so we will get started. It's my pleasure today to introduce our Alberta Improvement Facilitators to our second in the series of the Introduction to the STEP documents. So do a quick review of what we're going to do today. So I'll be taking you through a quick introduction and just a quick recap of what we covered last week. And then we're going to then pass it on, where Mia's going to take us through a line-by-line review of the panel management screening portion of the STEP documents. And then we'll move in and save time for a question and answer period. So that's what we'll be leading through today. So as I said, welcome to our Alberta Improvement Facilitators. And I'd also like to welcome Mia Kavanagh to the call, because she's going to be doing the brunt of this. I just get to say a few hellos and cover a few items with you, but she's really going to cover the meat today. Mia is a clinic liaison, and she's with the Highland Primary Care Network. She is a member of the EQUIP team, Elevating Quality Improvement in Practice, which is a team of improvement facilitators based in the Calgary area. And she was really instrumental in the initial formulation of these documents, and then really in the evolution of creating the set of 3 documents here that you see before you. So she really is, she can recite this stuff in her sleep, but we're so lucky to have her here and have her expertise both on this call and just as someone that we can tap into across the province. So I'd like to warmly welcome Mia and thank her again for her passion and willingness to do this for us today. So last week we discussed the evolution of the 3 documents. Mia told you where they came from and how we started just with a toolkit, moved on to condensing that into a checklist, and then went into creating a workbook, and how that work started with the Highland Primary Care Network, and then the 7 Calgary area PCNs took that on, took the further development on, and really did the testing for it. And then the other part of what we did last week is we covered that panel identification, so those first 3 levels, and went through line by line. And so we really talked about the importance of each of those activities. We talked about the importance and how these evolved and the needs that we had. So I wanted to just quickly, instead of recapping line by line and what's in the STEP documents, what I'm going to do is actually just show you a couple of pictures from an infographic that we created through Toward Optimized Practice. And so the first thing I want to show you here is the past couple of years through TOP, we've gone and knocked on the door of each of your primary care networks, and we've said, we just want to know a few things about what's going on in the province with respect to building that improvement capacity and working in improving our panels. And so you'll see there in 2015 that we had 87 improvement facilitators, approximately 52 FTEs. And then in 2016, we just saw a little jump there. We saw a few more bodies and a small increase in the full-time equivalency. But when we take a look at the next line there, we'll see that we had started to get a critical mass of panel coordinators, so a total of 81 full-time equivalents. And then in 2016, we see that number more than double, which is pretty fantastic in terms of the full-time people that we have out there working in the clinics and doing exactly the work that we covered last week. So I hope that really reinforces that we just have that we've been able to put some structure around this and really define the work and really have tools out there to help those panel coordinators and to help you as improvement facilitators to help guide those panel coordinators. So we know these are our 2016 numbers, and we already know just in the Calgary area alone that number has already jumped by another 10 full-time equivalents, and we're just a few weeks into 2017. So we may see that number climb even more. And then, of course, we have our EMR support personnel, which has held the line. So we thought this was some interesting information to share with you. Another item that is on that infographic just shows our provincial progress to date. So you probably all have to lean your ears over to your left ear over to your left shoulder to see those colors on those bar graphs there, and the difference between 2015 and 2016. So this is really for your information. I think there's a few interesting pieces that we see in terms of the progress from 2015 to 2016, where we see a big jump in the number of physicians and providers who have increased having an established panel. And then we see a jump there, a little bit of a jump there in terms of how many people are actively working on it. And then, of course, we still have quite a number there of unknowns and people who are not interested. So you can see that we still have a little bit of work to do in the province. And we're hoping that maybe these documents, again, by putting a little bit more structure around the work, are going to enable you out in the field to help us get those numbers at that latter end of that not interested and unknown up a little bit. So really quickly, as Carrie mentioned, we just wanted to highlight again where to access the STEP document, and we're pleased that we were able to get last week's webinar up for you really quickly. So here's a screenshot, but since I can, we're just going to go over here quickly and do a quick recap here. So under our, from our homepage, you can see right now there's the STEP documents, and we can link here. And it takes us right here to those the STEP documents, the checklist, toolkit, and workbook. And there you have the webinar part 1. And we hope in the next few days to be able to get part 2 up, so you can check back there as well. I'll just scroll up here again. If that link isn't there, because that's our news page there, you can go into the tools and resources under Patients Medical Home, and if you scroll down here to panel and continuity, I'll just give it another moment there to catch up, because I know I'm a couple of seconds ahead of you. And if you scroll down under this panel section, the items there are in alphabetical order, and you'll see the STEP under the panel. So those are the 2 ways that you can go and access the documents, as well as the recording of the two webinars. So that's all I'm going to take the time up today. If there's any questions, feel free to pose them now, or if you would like, you can ask some questions online. I see that there's a couple of questions. Will the slides be available in paper copy? Certainly, for that individual, if you want to email us at top@topalbertadoctors.org, we can provide the slide deck if you wish. And of course, the webinar, and so all of the information will be available. So please let us know if you do want them. You can just let us know, or provide that feedback through the webinar feedback prompt that you'll get. Mia, I'm going to pass the torch over to you to take it away.
Okay, thanks, Lori. Thank you for the lovely introduction. You made me blush. Nobody can see that on my end, but I was totally blushing. So I wanted to welcome everybody on the call today. We have virtually the same amount as what we did last week, and I thought it was great that we had so many people calling in. That was fabulous. Obviously, there's a lot of people who want to know more about this, and so that really makes me very, very happy. So thank you for taking some time, because everybody is so busy right now, and or at least that's my view of things. And so taking an hour and a half is a good chunk of time, but I totally think well worth it in the end. So just one thing before I start back up again is that I just wanted to do a little shout out to some of the people at top, because I certainly wasn't the only person doing a lot of work around these documents. The equip team was very helpful in giving feedback and test driving a lot of the stuff. But at top, Carrie Remington, and Mark Lott and Barbara McCaffrey were we started down that path all together. And then from there, we had Lori Chilma, who was just chatting with you. She joined in, and Michelle Hane and Shannon Horrocks from top. They all did such a wonderful job and put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, along with my blood, sweat, and tears, and we actually brought it together. But I think at the end of the day, everybody thought it was very, very valuable. And every time we do this with clinics or with other improvement facilitators, we just keep getting reinforced about how valuable that is. I think, Lori, you were talking about that the other day, how you sort of felt like, again, I see the value. So I wanted to maybe just start by, Lori had talked about the 3 different documents. And so without trying to revisit everything that I talked about last week, I just want to hit on a couple of highlights. So Lori was talking about the 3 different documents. And so I'm hoping that a number of the people who are on the call are the same people who were on last week, and so we can kind of pick up where we left off. But just a couple of things I wanted to mention in terms of the documents themselves. Really important, I just keep wanting to mention this, is that the activities that you see on the checklist are the same activities you see in the toolkit and the same activities in the workbook, okay? So they do carry through, okay? On the checklist, really, to me, that one of the best things I love about it is that it's an excellent way to assess a clinic. Just get a state of the nation. Where are they at any given point in time? And it's super transparent, right? I've got something for myself. I myself have 20 clinics that I look after. Not everybody has the same clinics, or maybe even more clinics than me. But for me, I find that it's sometimes I'll spend quite a bit of time with one clinic, and then I'll let some clinic marinate with something for a little while and come back to them later, and I'll be like, okay, what were they doing again, and where did they put that data, and what field? And so I like making myself a lot of notes where I can refer back to later on, and just to keep me updated in my head about where these clinics are at. So really transparent. So it's transparent to me, transparent to my PCN. If my ED calls me up anytime and says, hey, like, what's going on with this clinic, I can tell her exactly where they're at any given point in time. And also really good for the clinic as well, because sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect there. And you ask them straightforward questions like, hey, you guys working on your panel? And they say, oh, yeah, sure, we do that all the time. We're great. We have no problems. And then when you start to kind of dig a little deeper, they're like, oh, we're not doing exactly what we thought they were doing. So it really gives you some incredible ways of discerning where anybody is at any given point in time. The toolkit is really an expansion of the checklist, or if you want to say it the other way around, the checklist is a condensed version of the toolkit. And the toolkit really adds a lot of the tools and resources that you can do for any particular activity. And so as you go through that, and I don't know, Lori, if you can just pull up one of those pages just so you've got the quick screenshot. I'm not entirely sure if everybody has one of these in front of them. I'm just watching Lori scroll through here. And so here it comes. So on this page here, this is the first page. And all the tools that you see in the second column from the right, it says tool available, you'll see for that particular activity, here is a number of resources that you can use to support that work. And so sometimes some of these things are duplicated, right? There are some, guide to panel ID that covers so much information. And TOP has really done a lot of great work to try to put together things like EMR tip sheets. And so you might find that you use that same resource for a number of different activities, but there are some that are very, very specific. And so hopefully you have a tool that will help guide you through a particular activity if you're having any troubles. And it was originally designed as a facilitator guide, but the facilitators aren't always the ones who are taking the clinics through these exercises. Sometimes they're self-guiding. And if you have a clinic that's really remote, that might be the case. Or like I have one of my clinics, for example, who I'm all about planting seeds with them. And I'll say, well, have you thought about this? Or what if you tried that? You need to get more information if this was there. And by the time I come back a couple weeks later, they're doing it. So yay. I don't actually have to do it with them. They have actually gone through that exercise themselves. And that's just how they prefer to operate. So if anybody who is currently on the call, or if you know of anybody who has a great tool that they would like to have added that they think would be really useful, then, maybe circling around with Lori or anybody at top. I'm just thinking like maybe Sue and maybe Sandy. I'm sure they're all connected. So if there's something you want to add and you think would be useful, then pitch it and see if it's something that you think everybody could use. So we do want to collect more information from anywhere we can get it. One of the things that we love about these tools is that it sort of helps us all sing from the same song sheet. So rather than reinventing some wheels, if we can leverage some of the tools that some awesome people up in the north end of Alberta have developed, then why not use them, right? So that's the toolkit. The workbook is really a place to sort of document the work that you're doing. What I have often seen in my time doing this kind of work is that you'll ask them again that same question I said earlier. Are you working on your panel? Oh yeah, we do that. We're perfect with that. We do that every single time. We have no problems with that. But if you actually get them to run like let's say a panel validation rate, I did that to one clinic once, and it was 11%, and they thought they were amazing at panel validation. So that was a bit of a rude awakening for them. But it also is a way to say, okay, like no baloney. Where are we really at? Is this actually where you're at, or is this just where you think you're at? So it's really, really great in that way that you can start documenting some of this stuff. And also because the outputs on the checklist are things that you should be doing with each activity, right? Are you documenting your job descriptions? Are you writing some of this down? Have you actually pulled some of these numbers? And can you actually produce it and write it down? If you can't do an output, then chances are you aren't quite completed with that activity yet. So this workbook was a place that you could put all that stuff down. And so as you can see on your screen, each activity has its own page. And so if you want, you can use the entire book and hand it over to the clinic, or you can pull out a single page and just say, okay, we're just going to work on this one today. And it's going to have a number of things here for you to do, questions you should be asking, maybe a description of the activity of itself, and then some exercises to go through, some questions to ask yourself. Lori, man, you're reading my mind. This is great. You'll see on the right-hand side for this particular exercise, one of the tools is the panel maintenance tool from the Guide to Panel ID from top. And so any place that we felt appropriate, we would add a chart or a table or something that would help guide you through that exercise. And so you don't have to use this one exactly. Maybe you have things that are unique about your clinics that you might need to flesh out. But this gives you a great place to kind of start, and then you can expand on that or use certain parts of it. So hopefully all these things are going to be super useful to you. So that sort of just gives you a kind of visit some of the things that we were talking about last week. So let me just pause for 2 seconds and see if anybody had any questions about the things we talked about last week, about any activities, or about how to use one of these particular documents. Does anybody have anything they want to ask? No? Pretty quiet? Okay. So just as an aside, I actually can't see any of the questions that get typed into the panel, and so Lori's going to jump in if anybody does ask a question, and please do, because maybe I'm not doing a fantastic job of explaining what I mean with something, so please don't feel bad about jumping in and asking questions. So I want to dive into the second set of activities. I'm just trying to think here. One of the things I think I wanted to do was just talk for 2 seconds about the role of improvement facilitators, because I want to say I've been around a long time, but I'm not that old. But I've been doing this for a little while, and what I've noticed over time is that we are still kind of trying to show the doctors what we do. There's sort of this sense of, well, if a chronic disease nurse comes into the clinic, I know what they're for, right? They're here to help me with my patients and work on their health and so on and so forth. And there are other resources within the PCN that might get, provided to a clinic, and they know exactly what they're for. But our role is a little bit more nebulous. And so one of the things that I love about these documents is that really this provides a lot of structure to the work that we're doing. And so if we're going into a clinic and we're saying, hey, I'd like to work on panel with you, if you say that some doctors completely get it. They're early adopters, they're total champions, and other ones are maybe a little less convinced that this is going to be helpful or that it would be meaningful to them. And so sometimes we spend a lot of time building relationships with them and talking about why am I here and what am I doing with you. And this really sort of provides some very concrete activities and things that you would be doing with the clinic. And it makes a lot more sense, right? I think that in my previous awareness of the people that have come to this role, you sort of bring your experience and everything through your lens to the clinic. So for me, I'm an RN. I also am a mediator, but I also do a lot of work with EMRs. And so I bring all those things to the table when I come to the clinic. But there are people that come from change management backgrounds. There are people that come from just maybe, I know there's a few out there that you maybe previously were working with one of the vendors, one of the EMR vendors. And so they know lots about that one particular EMR, but not as much about other EMRs, right? So you bring a different set of skills and your own personality and stuff to the table. And so these activities really is a way of all of us sort of coming to this work with a similar approach, right? And no matter what we bring to the table. And so this is kind of fascinating to me, and I'll be curious to know whether or not this is something that gets commented on later on. Carrie or Lori, did you want to jump in and say anything about that, or are you just sort of in agreement, or maybe you don't agree with me? I don't know.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, and I love your perspective from the clinic side for sure, of how you're using this with clinics, how you're using this with teams, and from those people that are on the phone that might be executive directors or managers of improvement facilitators or managers of panel managers. A lot of people are using it to inform them around how they can best support those teams, where the learning might be, setting up their education and journey on their education. So we have some PCNs that are using this checklist to see, as a panel manager, can I do these activities? Maybe I'm a level 1, and as an IF, can I teach these activities? So people are using it to inform them around training, and so that's lovely too.
Yes, thank you, Carrie. I didn't want to neglect that point, but thank you very much for pulling that out, because in terms of the PCNs, I think it's going to be particularly useful in that way to the PCNs. The doctors are going to see what you bring to the table, right? But if there's something that you aren't familiar with, then it's really hard to match sort of an improvement facilitator who's kind of new to the work to a really advanced clinic. And so that could be a bit of a disconnect. And I don't know if we really paid that much attention to that in previous years. I think we're just becoming more aware of those kinds of things. So, okay, so with that, I just want to jump into some of the activities on the second page of the checklist, which is the panel management screening level 1, 2, and 3. So I'll just dive in and start with the first one. So again, I'm just going to reiterate that these are not numbered, and all these activities are not numbered for a reason, because clinics are not linear. We don't always approach them saying you have to do number 1 and then number 2 and number 3. Sometimes I have clinics myself where I have 2 activities are working on in level 1 and 1 activity in level 2 and 1 activity in level 3. So really, you're going to meet them where they're at, right? So it also gives you ability to flex things a little bit, because sometimes these clinics are not ready to do something. Maybe they're totally capable of doing it, but they're just thinking, God, we're just working on this right now, and that's all we can handle. This is all we can fit into our day, right? And so they just need a bit of time to kind of get through that activity. So again, don't feel the need to put these in any kind of order, okay? So the first one under screening level 1 is the clinic team establishes standardized clinic workflows for proactive patient care. And then I'm just going to read the second one because I just want to outline how they're different. So the second one is clinic team establishes standardized data entry workflows for the same thing. Okay, so when you're sort of at level 1, we're thinking that you're probably working on maybe 5 screening maneuvers or less. If you're sort of getting beyond 5, then you would have been likely doing this work for a little while. A lot of facilitators I know will actually discourage a clinic from, I've had doctors who say, let's turn on 10. And then when the rules and the triggers and stuff all start popping on there, they're like, I can't handle this. And then we have to scale it back. So sometimes that beginning work is just starting with a couple. Let's see how this goes. Let's make sure that these things are matching properly in the EMR. Let's make sure that however we're building these things in the EMR, that they're actually flagging the right things. So we sort of think that maybe you're doing maybe 5 or less, okay? And this is just kind of an idea. If they're doing 6, don't stress about that. If they're doing 4, don't stress about that. The idea is that you're generally just starting with a few, okay? But the first 2 activities are about 2 different things. So we're looking at things that are standardized clinic workflows versus standardized data entry workflows, okay? So I'm just going to describe that by saying that a clinic workflow would be something like if you're validating patients as they come in the door, like who is the person sitting there, who actually asks the question, what questions are they asking them before they even touch the EMR, how does that patient get from point A to point B, or how are you collecting that information? And then the second part of that is how is it getting put into the EMR? So are you the only person who's collecting that information, or is there 5 other people in the clinic also collecting the same information, but do you have to enter it in the exact same way, which is always ideal, right? So an example might be in some clinics, if you have blood pressure being collected, okay? So you may have one person who kind of run rooms, and that person might be the one entering BP. You also might have 4 people in a very large clinic all collecting BP. Are they all putting it in the same field? Or the other possibility too is that is the physician collecting this as well on top of everybody else, and are they putting it in the right field? Is it going into a discrete field versus into a progress note, right? Something that you can actually search and pull out later on. So the difference of these 2 activities is being, what is the clinic doing in terms of their workflow? How are they actually collecting the data? How many people are collecting the data? Are they actually, do they have something where everybody's doing, are they all on the same page? Are they aligned with what they're doing? So there's the clinic workflow versus the EMR workflow. And so those are the 2 different ways that I try to describe those. If you're talking about standardized data entry workflows in the EMR, now we're into a different ballgame, right? We're talking more about, does everybody know what your statuses are, and does everybody use the right status when you're putting something in demographics? Are your problem lists in good shape? Are the docs all on the same page? Are they okay with maybe their nurse adding things to the problem list, or is the doctor like, nope, don't touch my problem list? That's not happening. Is there a standardized document keyword list for all the things that are getting scanned in? I can't tell you how many times I've gone in to do some searches or build rules, triggers, and goals, that kind of thing. And the largest amount I've ever seen is I've seen 84 different ways to name a mammogram into the EMR. And so if you are building rules and things like that in the EMR, you have to know that. And also the staff that are putting these things into the EMR also have to know that. They have to understand the importance of it. I have one clinic right now that is really struggling with their keyword list because they have all their staff are really so incredibly independent that they don't care to get all on the same page. And so to be able to leverage that information out of EMR is 10 times more difficult. And so those are some of these activities are you're gonna spend a lot of time around that. So you might have everybody doing things from a clinic workflow perspective that everybody's kind of doing it tickety-boo. And then by the time you get to how it gets entered in the EMR, well, now that's a whole big body of work that might need to be done, right? And so is this stuff being discussed? Is it being documented, ideally in the workbook, or at least somewhere else? And is this being communicated with the rest of the team so that everybody knows what's going on? So those are those first 2 activities. Number 3 is identify exclusion criteria for choosing screening maneuvers, okay? So exclusion criteria means if you have, I'll give you the 2 most common examples. So if you're doing a screening maneuver around mammogram, one of your exclusion criteria might be anybody who's had a bilateral mastectomy. So would you be doing screening mammograms on somebody who has had a bilateral mastectomy? Now, it's really interesting the answers that you get because most doctors will say, well, of course not. And then I've had other doctors who say, oh, no, we still do them. Okay, so that's a bit of a physician preference. So have you identified that? Do you have any reason why you would not do a screening maneuver on any given person in the clinic. Obviously, part of that exclusion criteria is if you are between a certain age, if you're male or female, those are all exclusion criteria. But we're looking at things that are more, what kind of surgeries that you had. So if it's a mammogram, maybe it's a bilateral mastectomy. If you are looking at Pap screening, maybe it's for the people who have had hysterectomies, right? So all these exclusion criteria should be discussed, and you may get different answers from the docs. If you've got one doc in a clinic, it's super easy. But if you've got multiple docs, a little bit more of a difficult undertaking. And sometimes part of the difficulty of all of these activities is getting the time to sit down with these doctors and actually have the discussion. Because very often, one of the things I have said pretty much every day of my working life is that when I work with doctors, it's always in between patients, over lunch hours, and while they're eating. So generally, you don't have a lot of time, so that's always a big constraint. So activity that fourth one down, I keep wanting to call it number 4, but again, I want to try to avoid those numbers. The fourth one down is clinic or provider agrees to participate in a data sharing strategy. Okay, so that could mean you have a data sharing agreement with your PCN. That means you might have an information management agreement with your vendor. Okay, and every PCN is different this way. And so as a facilitator, it would be really great for you to know what the landscape is in your particular PCN. What are the things that your PCN requires? Has that ever been done? In my PCN, for example, when physicians join onto our PCN, they have a data sharing agreement. There's no discussion. There's like, if you want to be part of the PCN, then you have to sign this. And so every single physician has one. But then we also have additional agreements. So, for example, our PCN pulls data from Wolf out of the back end, out of the SQL side of Wolf. And so it means that we can actually manipulate the data a little bit better. We can get additional data that is not available in the practice searches. And on top of that, it reduces our need for a lot of resources because we can do things quicker. However, it requires additional data sharing agreements between ourselves, the physicians, and TELUS. So what are the things that you guys are doing in your PCN? It's really great to have an awareness of that. And in some PCNs, you may not ever touch any of that. You may have particular people that are responsible for those kinds of things. But as a facilitator, it doesn't hurt to just be aware and be mindful of those things. The fifth activity down is review charts manually to proactively determine eligibility for screening. Screening needs are communicated to the team. So this one's kind of a bit of a two-parter in my mind. Now, if you had attended the call last week, you may have noted that I tried to connect some dots between the levels of panel ID, levels 1, 2, and 3. And this is one of those activities that I want to also connect into levels 2 and 3. So hopefully I can get everybody to kind of follow along with me here. So this fifth activity here, it connects to the second last activity under level 2. Okay, which says opportunistic screening processes are fully developed for chosen maneuvers. And then it also connects to the second last activity in level 3, which is opportunistic and outreach screening are completely realized. Thank you so much, Lori, for doing that on the screen. So I'm just going to assume everybody can see that. If not, please pipe in. But what I'm just going to point out here is that what we're hoping is that sort of level 1 activities, again, meaning level 1 would be sort of beginner, level 2 would be sort of, you've been doing this work a while, level 3 would be quite advanced. So in that first level, that fifth one down, you may actually be reviewing charts manually. And so maybe after I just say a couple things, I might have Carrie pipe in because I know she does a lot of this stuff with ASAP, is you actually might be doing action reviews out of paper charts in some cases, if you are part of the ASAP program, or you may have a poet or a panel manager or a PCC who's actually going into the chart. And before they use any tools on the EMR, they haven't got any rules or triggers or goals or alerts or anything like that. And what they're doing is they're looking at the people who are coming in that day, or they're maybe doing it a day in advance, and they're looking and they're saying, okay, who's due for what? They want to be doing ASAP screening, that's great, and they may not actually even be enrolled in the program officially, but there are people looking through and say, okay, I need to check to see who's due for a PAP, who's due for a mammogram. And they're doing actual manual chart reviews, and manual just meaning they're looking in the screen for this one, and they're looking in the labs for that one, and they're looking in the problem list for this. They're looking for anybody who may have had a hysterectomy. So they're really doing these full-on chart reviews to determine who's due for their screening. And so it's a very sort of beginning step, right? And sometimes before you start doing a lot of work in the EMR, some of the doctors really like trying it out that way because you don't really have to invest any time and effort into configuring things in the EMR or changing your workflows. You can kind of keep things the way they are and still see if this is something that they're going to like, right? It's like, again, very, very initial steps of this. And so it might be that they're reviewing actual charts. It might be that we're reviewing charts in the EMR. But there are still, like, I still have a few poets in my PCN where the doctor is not great with the EMR, getting better, but not quite really comfortable with using things like rules and goals and triggers. And so what happens is that they really rely on their staff to do a bunch of the legwork, right? So this is right at the very beginning, they're starting to be identified, which is that opportunistic screening part of ASAP. And so really you're doing your opportunistic screening likely for those 5 screens or less, all right? Now, by the time you get to level 2, which is that second last activity down there, by the time you're getting to this point, you may be adding a couple of more maneuvers, or you may still be at the 5, but your opportunistic processes are really quite developed. So you've got a really humming system in the clinic about how people are getting identified when they walk in the door, right? And then by the time you feel like you got a pretty good handle on that, you're thinking maybe about outreach, right? So now that we're capturing everybody coming in the door and we're screening everybody who needs to screen at that point in time, are we reaching out to the people who are not presenting to the clinic right then and there? So these are people who, they're 25 years old and they're super healthy and don't ever need to be seen unless they have this nasty cold or something like that. I'm in more of a rural area myself. So I always give the example of, the farmer who comes in once every 10 years and only when he cuts off his finger. So you really have to, you still want to be looking at those people who are not presenting like every 6 months, right? And making sure that they're getting the routine screening, because one of those risk groups is not the people who are being seen all the time, because they're often doing their physicals, or if they have asthma or diabetes, then chances are they're coming in regularly to get medication. But it's the people who are really quite healthy that, maybe you have a woman who doesn't need to be seen very often. She's, on the younger side, and she's not getting her mammograms regularly. So she's getting them done every 5 or 7 years, right? So early detection is something that we want to hope to achieve with some of these people that just aren't presenting. So in level 2, you've got your screening processes really well developed, and you're really starting to flesh out and consider the things that you want to do in terms of outreach. And then by the time you get to level 3, on that second last activity, opportunistic and outreach screening are completely realized, meaning you've really done a lot of work. And again, this is why it's so advanced, because by this point, if you're up at level 3, chances are you've got your opportunistic going great, you've got a really good process for outreach, or you've got some regular times that you're running reports to call people in, and you're going even beyond ASAP. So an example of that might be, this is one I actually use very often, but it could be anything related to medications. It could be something related to chronic disease in some way. So one of the ones I use a lot with my clinics, just to help add value so that they can see the power of the EMR right a little sooner, is I'll run them a list that says, give me a list of all your diabetics that haven't got an A1C in greater than 6 months, right? And we just spit out a little list. And it's a quick little low-hanging fruit that we can usually grab, because it doesn't always rely on having something in the problem list. It is more helpful, but not absolutely necessary. So, and then can you do things like, okay, for everybody I have on Accutane, I need liver enzymes done every 6 months. Or if they're diabetic, I want a foot exam done once a year, right? So there are some clinics out there. If I'm not mistaken, Dr. Brad Baylor, who's out in Sylvan Lake, he's really quite a physician champion. I think he's got somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 rules in his EMR. Now, if you were to tell some clinics that, you'd get a whole lot of deer in the headlight looks or panic, because they can't fathom the idea of having that many in their system. But if their data is really clean, if it's really well standardized, and you've got solid processes, then a lot of those things are completely easy to handle. You just kind of go about and address them as you go. So some of the doctors will panic a little bit, and they'll say, oh my God, I have 50,000 rules that are flagging on my system. I can't deal with that. I often tell the doctors to ignore that. If it's showing you how many are due, don't even look at that, because, if you want to do some in-depth work on that, great, but I can show you some other ways that are going to do it that are not going to freak you out. So I just wanted to connect those activities, because it sort of takes you through that beginning stage, that intermediate stage, and that really advanced stage. So I'll just do one more activity, and then I'll pause in case anybody has questions. So the last activity under level 1 is investigate and or trial EMR features and functionality to support the automation of proactive screening. All right. Now, what that means is, and you may have clinics that are beyond this. Again, so we're going to try and meet the clinics where they're at. If they're really beyond this point, then we don't need to take them through it. But what this activity means is that if you have really not done a lot of work with your EMR, then are you aware of some of the functionality that you have in your EMR? Are you aware in Wolf you can build rules? Are you aware in Mid-Access it's goals and triggers? Are you aware in PS Suite it's reminders? So do you know what functionalities you have available to you to start automating what you were doing manually? So instead of doing all these reviews and looking in the chart and saying, okay, this lady is due for her path and memo, is there a way that we can automate that so that the computer tells you if they're due? You don't need to spend 2 hours every day looking through these charts. So has that been considered? Or has anybody tried any of those things? Does anybody actually know how to build them? There's lots of clinics, so you have maybe one person who can use the EMR pretty good, but if you've got a lot of turnover, sometimes like there are staff in some of my clinics where none of them know how to really use, they only really know how to book an appointment, they know how to maybe change if they've arrived or if they're done, or how to change the demographics, but beyond that, they really don't have a good bird's eye view of how the EMR works or what is available in terms of functionality. So are you aware of what is in your EMR that you can use? Have you tried any of them? Have you maybe tried building one rule or trigger for PAP? And I usually don't start with height, weight, and BP. That's just my own personal opinion. Sometimes it's a really easy place to start. And sometimes it also, like for example, with height, weight, and BP, it's really great because you can also just have it so that your staff are doing some of that collection, and then it doesn't impact the physician right away. But I like to go after the stuff that's really high clinical value. So I'll say, well, would you like a reminder that this person's due for their PAP or mammo? And most doctors are like, yeah, I'd love that. Then I don't have to look. It's right there for me. So sometimes we'll just start with PAP. And then once they have an idea about how this works and about what it looks like and whether or not it's going to be annoying to them in any way, then they'll sort of like, okay, let's add another one, right? So and some of that work they can do on their own, but some of it might be facilitated. So ideally, whoever the improvement facilitator is coming to the table will have the ability to help teach them. Or alternatively, again, going back to the toolkit, you're going to have access to all those top EMR tip sheets that they do, which have really undergone a lot of development in the last, I want to say, even the last 6 months. I think they've doubled in size, if I'm not incorrect. And the content in them now is really fantastic. So even for the basic work around ASAP and paneling, everything's right there for you. In this EMR, here's how you configure statuses. Here's how you do this. Here's how you run a simple report for that. It's all there. So you can help them go through it on their own or do it with them and increase your own knowledge about the EMR. So let me just pause there for a second because that's level 1. And I just want to see if there's any questions out there for anybody. And Lori and Carrie, are you guys good too?
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Mia. And yeah, I agree with you that the chart review can be a powerful way for an improvement facilitator to engage a physician and staff. Being a person that's done chart reviews in many, many clinics, you do find that on average, most clinics with all 11 maneuvers screen less than 50%, and some of them are lesser and some of them are higher. But it allows you to do a screening rate for a physician without having a clean EMR, really, and without forcing that standardization to happen yet. And it can really engage staff and physician if you say, what do you think your screening rate is? And would you be okay if we looked at, the screening rate of, let's say, 10 patients or 20 patients in the last 30 days? And it really allows you to understand how that practice works. Often being an external facilitator myself, I can go in and look at some charts, and I immediately can tell that they're documenting something in a place that's not searchable. So in fact, they are doing the screening, but if you were ever to do a rate through their EMR, it wouldn't show up. Or in fact, they're not offering the screening. And so it allows you to have a conversation no matter where somebody is at in their EMR journey. But beautifully said around the opportunistic screening and how it does advance. I would encourage you, as a group who's listening, to look at the workbook, and we'll have Lori show us in the next section. As Mia said, having those clinic workflows and EMR workflows documented, that is easily done in the workbook. There's places for it, there's examples for it, and each activity, as Mia just went through, will have that in the workbook, outlined, little exercise, and a place to document. And so maybe we'll have Lori show in the next section.
Yes. And in that first one, I've already given Lori the heads up. I'm going to have her go to page 43 for that first activity under level 2. So thanks for that, Carrie. What I'm hoping, because even though we're doing this line by line, and we do have a lot of the information that's really fleshed out very well in the workbook, I think what I really wanted to add over and above all that today is a lot of like real world examples. Where does the rubber meet the road, right? Or I just think talking about some of the things that I've seen, or talking about some of the examples, and quite often when I do that, I see it, like, I don't see it on the phone, but I do see in a room where lots of heads are bobbing and going, oh yeah, that happened to me, or that happened to me. So I just want to try and give you lots of examples wherever possible. So again, for anybody who may have questions, I would just say, okay, if you're not sure about something, then give me an example, like how would that work in this kind of clinic? Especially, and keep in mind any of the clinics that you have that are really challenging in terms of maybe they're moving forward in their journey quite slow, or maybe there's a lack of engagement, right? And then even engagement itself is a bit of a different piece of work, because a lot of these activities are very, fairly black and white. They're really structured and a way to kind of go at something in a very linear way. However, clinics aren't linear, right? And so sometimes it's a matter of finding where the value is, what would be most meaningful to them. And so that's more the facilitation piece. So
awesome. So
Mia, thanks, Lori, for pulling up 43.
Yeah. So Mia, we've got a question. I was going to add in one quick comment. Then we also have a question.
Yeah.
So I think the question might be a little deeper than my comment. So I'll start out first. I just wanted to reiterate what you said in your introduction about this content not being linear, that we're not going to move through the activities one by one. And I hope, having seen the activities in level 1, panel management screening level 1, some very simple tasks like doing a chart review, having some of these discussions around inclusion exclusion criteria, that would be something that you may be doing, or hopefully doing concurrently with some of those activities on the flip side of this around panel identification. So you don't need to have your yeses checked off on page 1 of the checklist in order to be doing these activities. So I just really wanted to emphasize that. And I think, having now gone through it line by line, that's probably a little bit more obvious to a lot of us. So I've got a question here from the audience, and that is, what forms of communication are or have been proven to be most effective with a staff that is made up of several shifts of staff, so all are not consistently there on one given day? So in this group, they've tried several staff meetings, emails, messaging through the EMR, and haven't had a lot of luck with people reading or hearing and then following and maintaining the processes that are being put in place for standardization of workflows.
Okay, all right. So there's, in my mind, there's a couple of different ways to tackle that. Now, me personally, because I always try to work the things that work well for me, one of the things that I do is whenever I go to see a clinic, I almost always will do a summary of my notes for that day that I was there to see them. And then I I have everybody, and I mean everybody, every receptionist, every MOA, including the doctors, on the string. And now sometimes that can be a little difficult because doctors are like, I don't want to get all these emails. But if you are really succinct and you are, generally I'll have a conversation with the doctor and say, okay, look, we need everybody on the same page here, right? And they need to know that you know what's going on, right? And so ideally I would like the clinic physician, either the lead or all the physicians, to be enabling that this work is happening. So, and if I'm noticing that it's not happening, then sometimes what I'll do is I'll go back to the physician and say, okay, so here's what we were trying to tackle, and we're struggling a little bit because we're having a little bit of difficulty with everybody kind of staying on the same page. And so maybe that might be an opportunity to call the clinic together for a lunch meeting, and just reinforce that why this is important. Sometimes I will say, okay, I often will spend a lot of time with the girls at the front desk. I just want to kind of throw them into a pool of people. That could be MLA's, reception, whoever's standing at the front. I'll say, okay, this is what we need to do. I need to make sure that anybody who is a walk-in gets identified as a walk-in, because at some point down the road, I might pull out a list of all the people that belong to Dr. Smith. And I don't want to be pulling all the people, because those aren't people that actually belong to him as a panel. Those are people who have just popped in for a prescription refill or something. So down the road, I may have you guys pulling lists for everybody who's overdue for their mammogram. So would you want to be calling all the people who are walk-in patients as well? Or are we just going to focus on the people who actually belong to this doctor? And I try to make it like I'm saving them work. I'm like, seriously, this would save you guys a lot of work. Later on, this is just going to be a waste of time, right? So generally, I try to make it to the physician's benefit as well as the staff's benefit as well, just to try to help convince them that, seriously, I'm saving you work later on. So whatever you can do to get the physician to help enable that work. I do meeting notes for everybody. So really, there's no excuse as people not keeping on the same page, because, I'll have staff that will say, I have one clinic in particular where she'll say, can you send me a text when you email me, because I never read that email. But for a while, she was kind of ignoring the emails and saying, I'm not worried about it. And then she started realizing that she was falling behind everybody else. And so we had to kind of address that clinic by clinic, making sure that we're all getting engagement. So those are just a couple of things I might do. I'm hoping that answers your question. Just pause in case somebody wants to pipe up. Okay, so if I haven't answered that question, I don't know if Carrie and Lori does anybody want to put up an email for me? If anybody wants to email me with questions?
Sure, or even working through your improvement advisor at top as well. We can often we can link you to your peers, either directly to Mia or other peers who we know, because that's a commonly asked question. For sure, getting that engagement and staff buy-in, and that was definitely a theme of the questions that we had last week. So thank you for that question, Mia. That's all of the questions that we have there now, but I just wanted to do a quick time check, let you know that we just have 30 minutes left, and we just leave a little bit of time. So we'll be motoring through the next couple of sections.
Okay, thanks for that, Lori. My apologies. I love to talk about this stuff, so it's really hard to get me set up. So I'll try to go through these a little quicker. Okay, so let's tackle screening level 2. So the first one is identify numerator and denominator for each chosen screening maneuver, including exclusion criteria, either determined by the clinic or even by the PCN. Okay, again, that might vary a little bit. So what we're meaning in this is that, do you know what a numerator is? Do you know what a denominator is? Lori has graciously put up page number 43 of the workbook, and this is really kind of the exercise part of the workbook for this particular activity. And the reason why I wanted to bring it up is sometimes I actually have heard from Carrie and Lori and other resources that not everybody really totally understands this language. This is very mathematical language. It's very analytical. It doesn't always fall into the healthcare world. So do you know what a denominator is? Do you know what a numerator is? And then do you know how to come up with those numbers, right? how do you go about finding that information? Now, generally, if you are getting used to using your EMR, if you recall back in the panel ID level, which one was that? So if you're going to, let's say, panel ID level 2, if anybody happens to have that in front of them, there are areas where you are conducting a lot of searches within the EMR that help you to clean your panel or to help identify subpopulations. And so in that particular instance, you likely have been doing some work to be able to be capable of that. So chances are you're going to have a little bit more know-how to be able to pull out, okay, what is my numerator going to be for this particular screening maneuver? So, for example, let's see, what would it be? Let's say for PAP, if you're trying to figure out what those numbers are, your numerator for your PAP would be, to come up with a screening rate, would be, sorry, let me start with the denominator first, actually. So your denominator would be your panel of patients, right? How many patients belong to this doctor that are female and between the ages of 25 and 69, okay, according to ASAP guidelines. So if that is your denominator, then you want to know, of that group of people, how many of those have got a current PAP on file? And that would become your numerator, right? So for each maneuver that you're working on, whether you're working on 5 or 10 or you've got a whole bunch of other ones that you're doing beyond ASAP, do you know how to come up with those numbers? And so sometimes it's a matter of actually looking at how are you collecting the information in the EMR. So I would say, first of all, don't underestimate some of these activities and how long it takes you to get through them. Because if, for example, I was in a clinic today and we were trying to come up with numerators and denominators for the mammogram screening rate. And one of the things that we were really struggling with is that they had multiple ways of naming their mammograms that were being scanned in. Plus, they didn't have their panel really well. So they couldn't really go through this activity very well because there was a number of struggles. But once I was able to show them, okay, look, we can't really come up with a great number here because this isn't really coming together and your denominator is not really coming together because the panel's not so clean. Now it starts to kind of show them where they have to kind of go back to those initial steps and make sure their panel clean, make sure that they're standardizing how things are going in, right? So
and
that's
Mia,
number one. Yeah.
Yeah, and Mia, can you explain to the group a little bit more around why the numerator and denominator? What does it really give you? When you have a numerator and denominator, that it's giving you the ability to give a percentage or a screening rate, right? Right. So you're able to mine in an EMR. A lot of people want to know their screening rate or their percentage of screening, and that's what this is doing for you. That means explaining that having that numerator and denominator and then timesing that by 100 gives you a percentage. And so that's super powerful. And I know you have lots of examples of that, Mia, where people might come in and say, oh, we've screened 100 patients this month, but without being able to say in context, that's 10% or 14% or what have you. There you go. Thanks, Lori. That the value of having a numerator and denominator.
Absolutely. And so in some ways, those first three activities are really about, and they sort of, the reason why we broke them up is because we have that third activity down was all about calculating the screening rate, right? And so you're determining if we know that all of the people in this particular panel were female between the ages of 25 and 69, and if only 40% of your panel actually has a current PAP on file, well, now you have something you might want to think about. Do you want to create a strategy around making that better? Do you want to, or is it something that you really didn't think was possible? A lot of male doctors would say, well, I'm always up to date on my PAP, but then they notice that women are going to a female doctor to get their PAP done for that one thing and then go back to their regular doctor, right? So they find more PAPs on Netcare. And so are you accounting for your lab PAPs versus your Netcare PAPs that are being scanned in? Because both of them are considered screened, right? No matter how the result comes in. There's actually can really be a ton of work around this because if you want to be calculating screening rates, some doctors are really resistant. I have one doctor in particular who I said, we're going to be providing you some screening rates. And she goes, well, wait a second, you're not checking up on how the work I'm doing, are you? And she thought that was really kind of an assessment of her work. And so I had to spend a lot of time with her talking about, well, this is really a reflection of your team, right? This is, do you have poets, and do you have people at the front who are supporting you and making sure that these people are getting screened for what they need, or your nurse, or whether or not we're actually reaching out and pulling in the people who haven't been really compliant. So you have to kind of take the focus off of that a little bit. But there's three different activities there. There is identifying your numerator denominators. Then can you generate it out of the EMR? And then once you have those, can you actually calculate your screening rate? So those are three very different things and can have challenges to all three. The next one down is proactive patient screening needs are automated in the EMR. So this is sort of the second part of that last activity in level 1, right, where you're sort of trialing the features and functionality. So at this point, you're likely putting those things in place. You're starting to do rules and triggers and goals and reminders. You're maybe putting some flow sheets in that gives them the ability to kind of glance at something and help them determine if somebody's due for something, whatever works for them. So you're actually starting to implement that in the EMR. And in some clinics, they may skip over that manual reviewing part and go straight to this one, right? So, and that's totally fine. The next one is clinic team increases number of chosen maneuvers and develops standardized workflows. So this one kind of goes along with those first couple of activities in level 1. This is sort of the part 2 of that. So you started standardizing some of the clinic workflows. You're standardizing how the data is getting put in. And now you're saying, okay, we've got a handle on these few that we've picked. Now let's take it up a notch, right? In my PCN, we've sort of mandated that height, weight, BP, HAP, and lipids are like everybody has to do those. But I have more than half of my clinics doing 8, 9, 10 of those maneuvers, right? So it just depends on if they're ready. So if they're ready, they can move forward. But remember, they have to go back, and they have to go through the same process, right? So you don't want to say, okay, we're ready. We're just going to turn on 5 more triggers, right? And you might go, whoa, let's go back and make sure that we've done the work of talking about the clinic workflow, about how the data gets entered. So again, don't underestimate the time that each one of these activities can take, because going back to the beginning for some of these new maneuvers you're taking on might be another big body of work. The next one is that the clinic team members are encouraged to pursue learning opportunities, specifically in the areas of panel screening and reporting. The clinic demonstrates advanced EMR skills. So by this time, if you are standardizing your workflow, you're starting to pull up numerators and denominators, you're doing a lot of proactive work opportunistically, you're starting to develop outreach by this point. So you're starting to develop these skills, and now you're going to be able to maybe possibly start troubleshooting things. So it's one thing to build a search or a rule in Wolf, for example. It's another thing to troubleshoot why it's not matching properly. So that's, again, another level of saying, oh, I've spent the time really looking at this and analyzing. And so maybe the things that you might have in terms of learning opportunities are things like peer-to-peer sessions. Top does a fantastic job of doing those every so often. Panel manager training, again, with Top. Maybe it's webinars like this, right? Just getting to be more knowledgeable about how to enable all this stuff in your own clinic. The next one was one I already talked about, which was sort of by this point, your opportunistic screening processes are pretty well developed for the maneuvers that you've chosen, and you're starting to think about possibly developing some outreach, which is that last activity. So you're starting to think about what your processes are going to be, who you're reaching out for, what are the things that are going to be maybe the most value to you. So it might be things like, I have, for example, one clinic that who has amazing screening rates, but how they do it is by pulling people in for their physicals regularly and complex care plans. Now, there's lots of debate around that because some doctors are actually letting go of the traditional physical and going a different way. But that's how they catch everybody, and it works phenomenally for them. I mean, their screening rates are between in the 80s and 90s, mostly up around the 90s and 96 kind of measurements. So they're doing fantastic. But they don't really do it the other way of enabling each rule individually. And so how we get there is sometimes a little different depending on the clinic. So what I'll do is I'll just go through these last set of activities because they're a little bit more complicated, but I want to make sure we have at least a few minutes for questions. So panel management screening level 3. The clinic team tracks screening and validation rates over time. All right. So if you remember on level, I'm just looking at my sheet of paper here. On the other side of the checklist, panel ID level 1, that last activity says that you are actually producing a validation rate. All right. And so that's one of the beginner steps for panel ID. And so by the time you get to be pretty advanced, you're starting to track your screening rate and your validation rates over time. So it might mean that you have in your lunchroom, you have posters that say, okay, in January 2014, our panel validation rate was 20%. And then 6 months later was this, and then 6 months later it was that. And then our screening rates for PAPs was this and this and this, and 6 months later it was improved by 10%. So these are the kind of things that you're going to want to track, and ideally share it with your team, because any of these, you want to celebrate some of the successes and show them that they're doing fantastic work. And then just reinforce that, hey, when you had a 40% screening rate for your PAP, now you're screening like 85%. So how many more people are we catching with things before they develop into something nasty, right? Activity number 2, second one down, is clinic team identifies panel-driven preventive goals that extend beyond ASAP. So this basically means that you've really just gone beyond everything in ASAP. You're doing more than 11 of the screening maneuvers or strategies that have been developed. Maybe you're doing stuff around PSA, again, doctor preference, whether or not they like that sort of thing. Bone density is one that I tend to build in the clinics just because they like it. Not actually part of ASAP, but they do screen for it. And again, you could do things around medication rules. You could do things around particular chronic disease, and maybe this would be a time to mention that I know TOP is really sort of going to be doing a body of work all around chronic disease and complex care. So there may be some more tools that come out down the road that will be helping with those sorts of things. But really, you've gone beyond ASAP in general. The third one down is panel manager coordinates or facilitates daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly huddles and or quality improvement activities that go beyond EMR reminders. Okay, so at this point, you have been able to not only get the data in level 2, you're doing a lot more work around analyzing the data and increasing your processes, just getting better and better and better. And then by the time you get to level 3, you're starting to think, okay, so my PAP screening rate is 40%. So what are we going to do? What strategies are we going to come up with that will help us capture more people? Maybe it might mean that you have to do a little survey with your patients and say, hey, I'm noticing that you really haven't, is it because you haven't got time? Is it because, your doctor's male and you prefer going somewhere else? Like, what are the things that are causing that rate to be the way it is? And you want to set a goal for improvement, or do you want to think about some strategies that you can do in terms of your clinic or your EMR workflows that will help you capture more information, or maybe even truly reflect what your actual rate is if the data is not going in appropriately. So, or align data between physicians, right? Standardize among the physicians themselves. So any of those things that you can do, they're all quality improvement activities and completely worthwhile. The next one is clinic team develops processes for screening patients with risk factors for certain diseases. Okay, so this one is a little bit more, sort of delves into the chronic disease a little bit more. And so I would say that you're creating things in the EMR that go beyond ASP, go beyond opportunistic and outreach screening, that you're looking for risk factors. So for example, would you maybe think about starting to populate your problem lists with first-degree relatives with colon cancer so that you can actually start to develop a list of patients who are higher risk than the average person for colon cancer, right? Because later on down the road, you can build in rules that way. The second last one is opportunistic and outreach screening are completely realized and integrated into the clinic processes. We've talked about that, right? We kind of built on that from level 1, level 2, and now this is sort of the ultimate goal, that all of these processes are really realized and completely integrated into the clinic. And it now becomes routine, right? It's more like, oh, okay, we're starting a new maneuver. Now we have to focus on blood pressure. Now this is just part of the routine of the clinic. This is the way we do things now. And the last one is panel managers become peer leaders and share knowledge with other clinic teams. And so although by the time we get to this point, most of the facilitators may not be as hands-on as they were in the beginning to get all these processes underway, So really, if you think they're working on these things, great, then tick them off. But I mean, by the time they get to level 3, they are really, they've got their house well in order. Their patients are well looked after in a more proactive way, and they're able to actually share their knowledge. They're able to reach out and teach other people who are maybe just in the beginning part of their journey. All right. Oh my God, I want more time to talk about this. So I've kind of gone through that second part at the speed of light, or at least it feels like it. So let me just ask if there's any questions. I think we've got 14 minutes or so.
Sure.
Anything that you want to comment on, Lori?
We've got a question on the chat here, so I'll pass that over to you to answer, because I think that'd be great to capture that on the webinar, and then we can turn off the recording. So the question is, would the physician who offered the PAP and got the result from Netcare be counted in their screening, or the physician who completed the PAP? So that's the example is a male physician that refers to a women's clinic for PAPs.
Okay, so the way I've always approached that, and please, Carrie and Lori, jump in if maybe there is another approach that is even better than what I might suggest. So when it comes to screening, we just want to know that that person has been screened. It really doesn't matter who has done the PAP, as long as it's been done, and that somebody has got their eyeball on it to know, was it normal, was it not normal? And so, for example, I have clinics that very often at the very beginning, we'd only be looking at building rules or goals or triggers, reminders for completed screens. So that might mean looking in the lab upload, right? Is that result actually in the chart? But the problem is that we realized very quickly, especially if you have a situation where some of those male doctors are, the women are going somewhere else and getting them done, very often the doctors were looking on Netcare and saying, oh, well, this has been done, so great, you're done, right? You don't need to do this for another 2 years or something like that. And then what would happen is that the doctors wouldn't actually have the clinics download the PAP and put it in the record. And so any rules you build for the EMR wouldn't always work properly, because it's really only looking at that one that was actually in the chart. And if that patient never comes, they're always going to have that rule there. So I encourage my docs that if they pull something off Netcare, or they have a person who moves from out of province and they bring their record with them, that they actually have a keyword that is specifically for that when they scan the document. So when I build the rule or the reminder or the trigger in the system, then what will happen is I will say in my criteria, look to see whether or not this person has had a PAP in the lab or has the scanned document with this particular keyword. And then the date that it's scanned in will tell when that was last done. And so then that way you can capture the vast majority of the people who are belonging to that physician.
Yeah, and I think I'll chime in too, Mia. So I think part of the question was around, let's say Dr. Jones is the female doctor. So would Dr. Jones get quote unquote credit for screening that patient, or would Dr. Smith, the male doctor? And so when you think about the principles of panel management, Dr. Jones, the female doctor, would not have that patient on their panel. The female doctor would know that that patient isn't a permanent patient. It is a patient that just comes to her for female problems. And so we learned from Mia the numerator and the denominator. And the denominator is all those patients that belong to Mrs. Dr. Smith, the female doctor, that are active. That's the denominator. And that patient wouldn't show up on the denominator, because that clinic should have a way to separate those patients that just come to that doctor but are not actually part of their panel. And so they wouldn't show up on the screening rates of the female doctor, because people who are in long-term care shouldn't be part of that. People that come as temporary patients would not be part of the female doctor's panel. And that's why it's so important to ask at the front around whether or not that person is, if that Dr. Smith is really their family doctor. And so the screening rate would actually go to the male doctor. That patient is on their panel. and we know colposcopy clinics do PAPs as well. So I hope that makes sense to you. It's really, that's why it's important to know whose care you're responsible for, who is really on your panel, and who might actually only see you for coughs, colds, or other reasons and shouldn't be on your panel list, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. Okay, so that's two excellent ways to look at it, actually, because one is logistically and practically with your EMR, and then the other side is the process of the paneling process and making sure that those people are identified appropriately.
Great. That's all of the questions that we have on the chat. So what I'm going to do right now is just thank everybody for their participation and halt the recording.